Hilchos Tzitzit Perek. We're going to begin now the halachas of the obligation of tzitzis. Ksus shel aleph. Ksus shechayv adu masis b'tzitzis menateri. Ksus sheyish lo arba knafayim yisra al arba. Timidasi k'ti sheyiskasa b'yidish v'dubish l'kotem malach lavada b'shuk v'en itzerach l'achir l'shamle v'lidach imoi. Tia ksus shel tzemer ish l'fahom b'ishtan. A garment to which the Torah obligates a person to attach tzitzis, there's three requirements. Number one, it has to have 4 or more than 4 corners. It must be large enough to cover both the head and the majority of the body of a child who's able to walk on his own in the marketplace without having someone else accompany him and watch him. It must be made of either wool or linen alone. Bees. Avatal shel sharmin can be the mesh should be the tzemer gefen be the tzemer gmal. Utzemer anovim. Venetz shel izim gein to men and chiyam mitzvah tzitzis the same daily observance tzitzis wush tiya amur bas yisrael arba. In contrast, a garment made of other fabrics, for example, clothes or silk, cotton, camel wool, hare's wool, goat's wool, and the like, are required to have tzitzis only because it's a rabbinic decree in order to show regards for the mitzvah of tzitzis. Those garments require tzitzis only when they are 4-cornered or have more than 4 corners, and there are the above-mentioned measures we discussed. The motive principle for these halachas is that all the garments mentioned in the Torah without any further explanation refer to those made of either wool or linen alone. Arba kanfis k'shusach arba v'leit balas sholish imkin arba v'leit balas chomish tamlemer asher tekasaba fidu balas chomish yeshav zeh v'lomani mechay balas chomish v'pete balas sholish v'ten ene balas arba knofis v'ten sheish b'chal chomish arba fidu k'shoyis says the balas chomish v'sheish yen ezel arba knofayim v'chol gazum mizum ezel chomish v'sheish kovad now arba kanfis k'suscha. Says the Torah says on the 4 corners of your garments. This applies to a garment which possesses 4 corners, but not to which possesses only 3. Perhaps it comes to include a 4-cornered garment and to exclude a 5-cornered garment. There continues with which you cover yourself. This includes even a 5 or more cornered garments. Why do I obligate a garment of 5 corners and exempt a garment of 3 corners? Neither has 4 corners as required because a 5-cornered garment has 4. Accordingly, when one attaches a tzitzis to a garment with 5 or 6 corners, one should attach the tzitzis only to the 4 corners, which are farthest apart from each other from amongst these 5 or 6 corners, as it says on 4 corners of the garment. The garment is made of a cloth and its corners of leather is required tzitzis. The garment is of leather and its corners are of cloth, it does not require tzitzis. The determining factor is that the makeup of the garment itself. A garment belonging to 2 partners require tzitzis, as it says on the corners of the garments. The term your garment, which is interpreted as excludes only a borrowed garment, since a bad garment does not require tzitzis for only 30 days. Afterwards, it does require afterwards. For a garment of wool, the white strands should be made of wool. Garment of linen, the white strands should be made of linen. For garments of other fabrics, that white strand should be made from the same fabric as the garment itself. For example, silk strands should be used for silk garment. Strands of goat's wool should be made for garments of goat's wool. If one desire to make white strands of wool or linen garment of any type of fabric, one may do so. Because wool and pishtan, pater, it's min. In other words, for garments made of their own fabric or garments made of other fabrics. However, in contrast, strands made from other fabrics can fulfill the obligation of tzitzis only for garments made of their own fabric. What is the halacha regarding making woolen strands for a garment of linen or linen strands for a garment of wool, even though we are speaking only of the white strands without tchelis? One might think that it should be permitted because shatas is permitted to be used for tzitzis as evident for the fact that tchelis is made used in woolen strands. And yet it should be placed on the linen garment. Nevertheless, this is not done. Why do we do this? It's possible to make the white strands from the same fabric as the garments. Whenever a conflict exists between the observance of a positive commandment and the adherence of a negative commandment, we follow Azay. If it's possible to observe both, then great. If not, the observance of the positive commandment supersedes the negative commandment. In the present instance, however, it is possible to observe both of them. Chayil should not be attached to a linen garment. Rather, one should make the tzitzis from white threads of linen alone. Not because the prohibition against Shana supersedes the mitzvah tzitzis, but rather the rabbinical decree imposed us one wear the garments at night, and one is not required to wear tzitzis. Because the Isser against Shanas, but rather the rabbinical decree imposed lest one wear the garment at night, and one is not required to wear tzitzis. And when say and they'll come out, they're going to be able to say when there's no mitzvah to it. The chiyuv is by day, not been at b'shas at the time, and you see. However, a blind person is chai b'tzitzis, even though he can't say acher and dre say other people's. Off in his man, a person there's a lot of words says at night, whether even though it's not his time. But don't make a bracha. One is a person make a bracha. This in the morning when he can recognize that chelas and the difference between chelas and light. The kids of Archala, what they say that you were wearing it. You make the bracha before you enwrap in the talis. You do not make a bracha on the tzitzis when you make it. Why? Because the mitzvah is that one should wrap oneself in the talis. What do we call this tzitzis? The Besamechas, you're allowed to go to the Besakis and the Besamechas, which tzitzis nifsego bechote lovan and telis zerka ba'ashba. If it rips, so you should throw it in the garbage from the shemis hashem go for kedusha, because it does not confer sanctity of the article itself. Also, it's forbidden to sell the garments of the tzitzis that going told was the tzitzis. Not because it's kedusha. Because we're worried that perhaps he's going to put on the tzitzis. People are going to think he's a yid, and then he's going to go and start killing yid and disguising himself as a yid. Women's servants and minors are not required to wear tzitzis ben. However, who knows how to should wear tzitzis in order to educate him to mitzvahs. If they want, they can wear it without a bracha. If a woman wants, we don't protest. Should wear tzitzis and they don't put it on, but they don't want to make a bracha. What is the nature of the obligation of the commandment of tzitzis? Every person is obligated to fulfill the mitzvah. If he wears a garment requiring tzitzis, should attach tzitzis to it and then wear it. And if he wears a garment requiring tzitzis, should attach tzitzis to it and then wear it. If he wears it without attaching tzitzis, then he has negated his positive commandment. There's no obligation to attach tzitzis to a garment that requires tzitzis as long as it remains folded in this place without the person wearing it. It is not that a garment requires tzitzis, rather the requirement is incumbent upon the person wearing the tzitzis. Even though a person is not obligated to purchase a talis and wrap himself in tzitzis, it's not proper for a person to release himself from this commandment. Rather, he should always try to be wrapped in a garment which requires tzitzis so that he will fulfill the mitzvah. And in the time of davening, he has to be very careful. it's a shameful for a Torah scholar to pray without it being wrapped in a talis. Yudbei's last halacha, Elim Yadam Reserve Mitzvah Tzitzis Sharikos Shkola V'Tola B'Kol Mitzvah Kulos. Kulan. Shnemar Yisem Mesei. Described as Kol Mitzvah Hashem Asisem Mesei. A person should always be careful regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis because the Torah considers it equal to all the mitzvahs and consider them all dependent on it. As it says, and you shall see them and remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. Rich Rachamon the sign and blessed be Hashem grants assistance. Sefer Ahava Hilchos Tzitzit Mitzvah Se Achas V'Hilasis Tzitzis Al Kanfi Aksus Ubi Mitzvah Elu Program Elu. They contain one mitzvah to make tzitzis on the corners of a garment, and the mitzvah is explained in the following 3 brakim. Aleph. Onif Shoisin Al Kanaf HaBeged Mimin HaBeged Hu'anikra Tzitzis. The tassel that is made on the fringes of the garment from the same fabric. This is called tzitzis, because it resembles the locks of the head. The Navi says, and he took me by the locks of my head. The tassel is called white strand because we are not commanded to dye it. And there is no, the Torah did not establish a fixed number of strands for the tassel. They then take a strand of wool that is dyed a sky-like color and wind it around the tassel. This is called tchelis. The Torah did not establish a fixed requirement for the number of times that this strand should be wound around the tassel. Thus the mitzvah contains 2 commandments. First, to make a tassel on the fringe of a garment and to wind the strands of the tchelis about the tassel. And you shall make tassels and you shall place on the tassels of the corners of strands of tchelis. The absence of tchelis does not prevent the mitzvah from being fulfilled with the white strands, nor does the absence of the white strands prevent the mitzvah from being fulfilled with the tchelis. Kate said, how so? If a person doesn't have tchelis, like nowadays, we don't know what tchelis is, so you just make the white strands. Similarly, if the white strands snapped, and were reduced, in other words, they didn't extend beyond the corner of the garment, and thus only the tchelis remained, also it's kosher. Hey, even though we're saying that one does not prevent the other from being fulfilled with the mitzvah, nevertheless it's considered one mitzvah. One who wears it, whether with lavan or with tchelis or not, they are mekayim a positive commandment. The sages of the early generation said, the Torah says, and they shall be tzitzis for you. That teaches us that they are both one mitzvah. The presence of each of the 4 tzitzis is necessary for the mitzvah to be fulfilled because of the 4 are elements of a single mitzvah. How are tzitzis made? One begins from the corner of the garment, the end of the woven portion, when it sends upwards no more than 3 finger breadths from the edge, but no less than the distance of a knuckle of the thumb to its end. Thus the hole is made and 4 strands inserted, causing them to be folded in half. It comes out that you have 8 strands hanging down from the corner. The 8 strands must be at least 4 finger breadths long. If it's more, it's kosher. How do we measure etzbah? This refers to a thumb breadth. One of the 8 strands should be tchelis, the other the 7 should be white. Afterwards, one should take one of the white strands and wind it once around the other strands close to the edge of the garment and let it go. So then one takes a strand that was dyed tchelis and winds it twice next to the coil made by the white strand and then ties the strand. These 3 coils are called chuya segments. Afterwards, one should leave a slight space and make a second segment using only the strand that was dyed tchelis. Again, one should leave a slight space and then make a third segment using only the strand that was dyed tchelis of the segment as well. The same thing as the last segment. One should continue this manner until the final segment, which is made of 2 coils of tchelis and a final coil using white strands. Since one concludes with it, because one should always conclude with it, because one should always ascend to Kedusha and never descend. Why should one begin using a white strand? So that the coil that is next to the corner of the garment should be similar to the garment itself. Same pattern is followed regarding all 4 corners. How many segments should be made at every corner? No fewer than 7 and no more than 13. This represents the most preferable way of performing the mitzvah. If a person only did one coil, one segment, it's called a person wound tchelis around the majority of the length of the tchelis is kosher. For the tchelis to be attractive, however, all the segments should be the upper third of the strands, and the remaining 2/3 should hang loose. One must separate the strands at the locks of one's hair. A person who makes tzitzis using only white threads without using tchelis should take one of the 8 strands and wind it around the others, covering 1/3 of the length of the strands and leaving 2/3 hanging loose. When winding the strand around the others, one may create segments as one does when winding the tchelis. If one desires, this is our minhag. If, however, one desires to wind the strand around the others without creating segments, one may. The general principle is that one should intend that 1/3 of the tzitzis be bound and 2/3 hang loose. There are those, however, who are not precise about this matter when making tzitzis with white threads alone. Should one wind a white thread around the majority of the length of the strands, or should one make a single segment? The tzitzis are kosher. Both the white strands and those dyed tchelis may be made out of entwined strands. Even a strand that is made from 8 strands entwined in the single strand is considered as only a single strand in the context. Both the white strands of the tzitzis and those dyed tchelis must be spun for the sake of being used for the mitzvah of tzitzis. Tzitzis may not be made from wool, which becomes attached to thorns when sheep graze amongst them, nor from hairs, which are pulled off from the animal, not from leftover strands of the wool, which the weaver leaves over when he completes the garments. Rather, they must be made for the shorn wool or for the flax. Tzitzis may not be made from wool, which was stolen, which came from the Yarnei Dachas, or which came from a hektish animal. If such wool was used, it is possible. If a person bows down to an animal, its wool cannot be used for tzitzis. If everyone bows down to flax, which is planted, it's acceptable because it did change. Halacha Yud Beis. Tzitzis also is to be psulish never dalba when he's also them tzitzis up. Also is so blekavala kshira. Tzitzis nasam na also mikedim psula. So tzitzis made from a goy or a Gentile and not are apostles. It says, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall make tzitzis for yourself. If, however, a Jew made tzitzis without the kavanah, that they be used for the mitzvah, they are acceptable. Tzitzis that are made from those already existing are not acceptable. Kate said, how so? Hey, be kanaf sheish tzitzis for all begad afil ish ba'isa kanaf amal psulish. I'm a Muslim tzitzis Lo yimina osir shar zadim lemishin asim meila. Umut lahat tzitzis in begel zev leklis bebegel acher ben lo ben tchilas. Should a person bring the corner of a garment which has tzitzis attached to it, and sew it on another garment, it's not acceptable. This applies even if that corner of the garment is a square cubit in size. The concept is derived from what it says, and you shall make tzitzis for yourself. You should make them and not use those who were made previously, since this would be as if a mitzvah came about on its own accord. It's permissible to remove strands of tzitzis, whether white or tchilas, from one garment and tie them onto another. Yud. Tal da'afut mishnei confinement zil lezu, kosher karav zil kilchos v'karav zil kilchos v'rachem achat chabamtza nifta zeh mizeh, psul shaberesh kosher nahayib psul, and the fish shtag confinement area zu bezil chatum shabeneo, shapasik v'nasa shtei chutim and nifta zeh semenasei. Should one suspend the strands between two corners of the garment and the tzitzis on each of the corners in a proper manner, then separate them from each other, it's unacceptable. As far as it is, at the time that they were tied, they were unacceptable since the two corners were connected with each other through the strands. When the strands were cut, the two tzitzis were made. This is considered as making tzitzis from those which already exist. Hitul tzitzis al tzitzis, miskam lavatos zeh matos zeh nechit chukshira. Miskam leis vav b'shachat achach mishten arzeb psula shaykish. Heisa postal kshiter nechit chet seves nimtza nishanas v'nasi shasiyasi rishin psula heisa. A person, this applies when a person ties tzitzis over existing tzitzis. Should he tie the second set with the kavanah of nullifying the first set, if he unties or cuts off the first set, the tzitzis are kosher. Since, however, they have tied the second set with the intention of adding or second tzitzis, tzitzis are not acceptable, even though he cuts them off. When he added the second tzitzis, he passed both sets, and when he unties or cuts off the additional one, the remaining one is disqualified because it involves making tzitzis from those which are already existing, since the manner as which existed previously was not accepted. Allah says, all tzitzis of garments are unacceptable. For example, a person placed tzitzis on garments that had three corners. Afterwards, he made the garment the fourth corner and placed the tzitzis also. This is also usher because the Torah says make braids and not which were previously made. Allah Yizayin. In Kefanas Etzasa Shnaim Latilin, tzitzis al Abra Knafesh Yikula Alam Kein Tfara Kula Vafilim Mino Chachas. A garment should not be folded in half, and it's then tzitzis hung on the four corners of the folded garments, unless one sews it along one side entirely. It's sufficient, however, to sew it on one side alone. If the corner of the garment to which the tzitzis were attached is torn off the garment, if more than 3 finger breadths were torn, it may be sewed back in its place. So, first of all, if the corner of the garment to which the tzitzis were attached is torn off the garment, if more than 3 etzbais were torn, it may be sewed back in its place. If less than 3 etzbais were torn off, it should be not be sewn back. The portion of the garment is between the hole through which the tzitzis are attached at the end of the tzitzis. It's kosher, even though only the smallest portion of the fabric remains. Similarly, if the length of the strands of the tzitzis was reduced, as long as it remains the size to tie a loop, that's okay. Should, however, even a single strand be torn off from the place to which it is attached to the garment, it is possible. Sefer Hilchos Tzitzit Perek Sheni. This Perek we're going to speak about the halachas of tchelis. Halacha Aleph. Tchelis amud bateda b'chol makom miyad samar tzavah kapato shebachel shebakachel. Chal, v'zoi demusa lekir nirst ein betarish lekir. V'tchelis amir b'tzitzit ser shiat tzvilas yiduah shemenes b'yafi v'leit tishtana. Because the nitz ba b'isa tzvil posel tzitzis al b'ishu kiner lekir k'in shetzvil b'asotos b'shar hamashchinin. As a posel tzitzis v'rochel baz eis samar posel tzitzis. The term tchelis mentioned throughout the Torah refers to a wool dyed light blue. In other words, the color of the sky, which appears opposite the sun when there is a clear sky. The term tchelis, when used regarding tzitzis, refers to a specific dye that remains beautiful without changing. If the tchelis is not dyed with this dye, it's unfit to be used as tzitzis, even though it's sky blue in color. For example, as using these different inks, is possible for tzitzis. The wool of an that is a goat, gave birth to it, is possible to use for tzitzis. Case that saving tzitzis, how is the tchelis of tzitzis dyed? Today, she usually design rachach v'in dam shalozen, udam shedeme le'ein ham. The day b'shem k'diyah v'yam amelach u'matzi. V'neisen es adam diyah, v'neisen imei samana k'mei hakimanya, k'etzabuk der shat zavan eisen, Wool is taken and soaked in wine. Afterwards, it's taken and washed until it is clean and then boiled with bleach and the like, as is the dyer's practice to prepare to accept the dye. Echalazin is a fish, color like the color of the sea, and whose blood is like the black like ink. It's found at the Mediterranean Sea. The blood is placed in a pot together with herbs, as is dyer's practice. It's boiled and the wool is inserted. It's left there until it becomes sky blue. This is the manner in which Hilchos Tzitzit is made. One must dye tzitzis tchilas with intention that is be used the shema of tzitzis when shalosh shalad shema is possible. By yeda sheish be'atzevim tzevim be'matzem lebotki im yafo im lam nifsla yir kula. If one did not have such intention, it's unacceptable. When one places some wool in the pot in which the dye was placed to check whether the dye is good or not, the entire pot may no longer be used for tzitzis. Kate said, yeah, so what should he do? The kechat tzevim and yeda be'klikot. And omaniach be'matzem shebedek be'v'sevis estra bodak shai nitzbala. He should take some dye from the pot in a small container and place the wool he uses to check it, and afterwards he should burn the wool used to check, for it was dyed for the purpose of checking, and pour out the dye used to check it, using it for an experiment disqualified it. Afterwards he should dye the wool tchilas with the remainder of the dye which was not used. The tchilas in the kachas min hamumcha should only be purchased from a recognized dealer. Because we're worried that perhaps it was not dyed with the intention that it be used for the mitzvah. Even though it was purchased from a recognized dealer, if it was checked, it was discovered that it was dyed with another dark dye which is not permanent, it is possible. So how can tchilas be checked to see whether it was dyed properly or not? Sharing that tchilas b'kulung meis leis. The number may know like cause shadowing cause of leifim batzuk shel seren shema option eis in the morning. Yes, when eis nesu tchilas shnashana specific. If a batzuk b'taner was in a tchilas from a pastor, then eis im kom masha eis absula v'im haisiv eino v'shur yosem masha eis koydim afia shadow. So one takes straw, the secretion of a snail, the urine that has been left standing for 40 days, and leaves tchilas. This mixture for the entire day. If the color of the tchilas remain unchanged without becoming weaker, it is acceptable. If it became weaker, we place the tchilas which changed color inside a dough of barley meal that was left to sour for fish brine. The dough was baked in an oven and then the tchilas was removed. If it became even weaker than it was previously, it is unacceptable. This strengthens the color and became darker than it was before being baked. It is kosher. One may purchase tchilas from the outlet which was established a reputation for the district without a question. It need not be checked. One may continue to rely on reputation until a reason of suspicion arises. Somebody entrusts tchilas by a goy for safekeeping is no longer kosher. Perhaps they changed it up. If it was in a vessel, there was two seals over there, which is a seal inside of the other seal. She is kosher, but is possible. Allah says the Zion. Person who found tchilas in the marketplace, even if it was cut, it's possible. If, however, it's twisted, then it's kosher. A person purchases a garment to which tzitzis are attached in the marketplace. When he purchases it from a yid, it can be presumed that it is acceptable. If he purchases it from a goy, it is presumed on it to be acceptable. From a non-Jew who is a private person, it is not acceptable. When a garment is entirely red, green, or any other color besides white, its white strand should be made to the same color as it itself. If it's green, Yudokin, make it green. If it's red, make it adum and red. If it's tchilas, and make the white from other colors, except for black. If you need it, because it looks like tchilas. He should wind it with one strand of tchilas around all the strands, as one does with other tzitzis that are not colored. Kosha, einish, mishenem, einiach lovan, yosim, einish, mishlei, einiach tchilas, fish, lovan, masal akel. The punishment given someone who does not wear tzitzis of white strands is more severe than the given of one who does not wear tchilas. Tchilas and amatsuil akel. And because the white strands are easily acceptable, while tchilas is not acceptable. So again, the punishment given someone who does not wear tzitzis of white is more severe than that given one who does not wear tchilas, because the white strands are easily accessible, while tchilas is not available in every time, in every era, because the unique dye mentioned above.